Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Bevan Foundation webinar. We're really pleased to bring you this afternoon the first of three in a series looking at a new Wales, looking at how Wales has been changed and radically reshaped by COVID-19. One of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 has been on learning. We've seen new types of inequality emerge and we've also seen existing inequalities deepen. Of course, it's not just learning. We've also got webinars coming up looking at changes in health with the Shadow Minister for Health, Russell George, and we've also got changes in work and business with the opposition spokesperson, Luke Fletcher. But today, of course, we're looking at education throughout the life course, from early years right into later life. The Bevan Foundation is Wales's most influential think tank. We're an independent charity funded by trusts and foundations, by individuals and by organisations who take out a subscription. We develop solutions to poverty and inequality, and many of our ideas have been put into action and are having a real impact. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the business. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website shortly. We do have time for Q&A, so please use the Q&A box and we'll try to deal with as many questions as we can. And we also have simultaneous translation. To use that, to hear Welsh translated into English, click on the globe icon and choose English. The channel, that's what you need to do to hear the simultaneous translation. So I'm delighted that we've got the Minister for Education and Welsh Language with us today, Jeremy Miles. Jeremy has a long-standing commitment to equality and social justice, and he's announcing today some exciting and innovative proposals. Some of you may have seen some of them in the media this morning, but there may well be more to come. But even better than reading them in the media, we're actually going to hear them from Jeremy himself. Jeremy's going to talk for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll be able to take your questions as you put them into the Q&A box. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the Minister for Education and Welsh Language, Jeremy Miles.
Diolch yn fawr Victoria am y cyflwyniad hwnnw. A hoffwn I ddweud ar y cychwyn bod i'n falch mai o dan awenau sefydliad Bevan ydyn ni'n trafod sut mae'r system addysg yn mynd i'r afel a thlodi heddi. Mae'r gwaith i chi'n neud fel sefydliad i daflu goleuni ar anghydraddoldebau yng Nghymdeithas Cymru a'r angen i oresgyn, tlodi a'i effeithiau yn parhau i gael effaith sylweddol yn y maes. Ac ar nodyn personol iawn, rwy'n falch dros ben wedi cael cysylltiad hir dymor gyda'r sefydliad. I know how deep your commitment goes, so thank you for all that you and your colleagues do. It's never been more important. Our programme for government, commitments to combat poverty and inequality, are a central driver for all that we do as a government. And it shapes how we work with partners across Wales. It is a shared objective. And as we move into the third decade of devolution, I think there is a lot to celebrate in what collectively we have achieved in education. Much of this has culminated in our current reform programme, our commitment to invest in early childhood education and care, the new school curriculum, which we start to roll out from September of this year, our Additional Learning Needs Act, and the boost in support that we are providing for all forms of post-16 education and lifelong learning are key to this. But you can also see it in our free school meals policy, our funding for the cost of the school day, and initiatives around the music service and the book gifting programme. The thread that disadvantage should not hold you back in pursuit of your progress and in the pursuit of excellence. But if we are to create a truly excellent and equitable education system in Wales, achieving high standards and aspirations for all, there is much more that we need to do to improve equity of outcomes and particularly to tackle the impact of poverty on attainment. We have made progress in this area, but the truth is that it has been too slow, and it still leaves us well behind where we want to be. If you look, for example, at the 14 to 16 age group, we know from our own data, but also from data which Estyn and others provide, that there's been too little progress over the last decade in closing the attainment gap between learners from low-income backgrounds and their peers who don't live in poverty. And the disruption of the pandemic has made things worse. Research which has been carried out by our universities with their partner schools and analysis across the sector tell us that well-being and attainment of learners living in poverty has fallen even further behind other learners during the pandemic, and we have to address this as part of the recovery process. We've undertaken an analysis of the post-16 outcomes for those learners who've been affected by COVID disruption, and it includes their progression into post-16 learning, their retention on courses, and what qualifications they've achieved. And this gives us a baseline over time to understand how COVID has affected those learners' progression and how this is impacted by other characteristics like deprivation. And this understanding will help us to continue to invest in support for those learners who need it most. Across Wales, there is far too much variation in learner attainment between schools with similar socioeconomic profiles, and particularly between local authorities with similar demographic characteristics. What this means is that overall, the education system has not made sufficient progress, nor sufficiently consistent progress, towards ensuring that socioeconomic disadvantage does not strongly influence what learners will achieve in education and in their lives. We cannot accept this situation, and I'm determined to take radical and sustained action to address it. We can't and we won't give up on learners who are affected by poverty. I want to see high standards and aspirations for all our learners. Now, qualifications play a crucial role in young people progressing to their next steps and realising their ambitions, but there are other crucial indicators of progression alongside this. So we will develop a broader range of criteria for measuring success, and these will focus on the outcomes in the lives of learners, not simply inputs which we make as a system. Some of this is likely to be around employability, some of it around evidence on well-being, and on attainment of individual learner goals. An early practical step that I am taking is to commission a review in this area, and I've asked my colleague Bevan David, the member of the Senedd for Caerphilly, to look at how education providers provide practical work-related experiences and to make recommendations around the focus, consistency and effectiveness of these. He'll work with colleges but also with a number of schools across Wales to understand what good practice can look like in provision of careers and work-related education, particularly in the context of the new curriculum. As Minister for Education and the Welsh language, my mission is to bring about a step change in tackling the impact of poverty on attainment. And I've been clear that all education policies in Wales should contribute to this mission and be evaluated by that objective. And I'll be ensuring that my department turns its organisational capacity to address this policy priority and to deliver on that agenda. So I want to set out in the speech how we'll build on our current policies where they've had success, some of the new policy developments, and how we intend to bring about the transformative change that I think is required. But before I do this, I want to reflect briefly on what we can draw in that exercise from the life of Aneurin Bevan and his experience of education. In truth, his experience of formal education, obviously in very different circumstances, was not very positive. In Michael Foot's words, he hated school with an abiding hatred. At Sehawi Elementary School, he experienced bullying by no less than the head teacher, and both Foote and one of his other biographers, Nick Thomas Simmons, speculate this may have contributed to the stammer that he struggled with for the rest of his life. At the age of 13, therefore, Bevan put formal education behind him, and after a brief period as a butcher's boy, he joined his father and brothers underground in the coal mines of Tredegar. Yet he went on to live a life of renown as one of the greatest Welshmen of the 20th century, a mesmeric orator, a profound socialist thinker, and obviously the architect of the National Health Service. He didn't allow his negative experience of education to stifle his aspirations or to suppress his lifelong love for education and learning. And his father, a Welsh speaker and an Eisteddfodwr, had inculcated into him a deep love for reading. The riches of the Tredegar Workmen's Library, established through the contributions of the miners and ironworkers in the town, was able to satiate that passion, providing what Di Smith describes as a divine revelation for him. And through his membership of the South Wales Miners' Federation, he was able to access independent, working-class education provision. Such was his now thirst for education that in 1919, having won a union scholarship, he moved to London to study, together with Jim Griffiths and other figures of the South Wales coalfield, at the Central Labour College that had been established by the Fed and the National Union of Railwaymen. And he emerged from there as the committed socialist propagandist that was destined to the political career that soon followed. His learning, however, continued throughout his life. He was a voracious reader and a lover of the arts, all shared with his wife and comrade Jenny Lee, who would, of course, herself go on to found the Open University. I've dwelt on Bevan's experience because there seem to me to be some key things we can learn from it in the context of what we're discussing today. We must ensure that the experience of our learners from an early age is a positive one through the curriculum that we offer them, the teaching which underpins it, and through attention to their well-being. The aspirations and ambitions that we encourage them to have are central, and the leadership that facilitates all of this is crucial, so that the talents of those future Bevans are not lost. And we must also ensure that learning continues beyond the age of 16, not just for those who have succeeded previously, but also for those like Bevan who have not yet fulfilled their potential. The lifelong learning which enabled him to eventually fulfill that nascent ability should be available to everyone, and it should be at the heart of our communities as it was in Tredegar for Bevan. So these 8 areas: early childhood education and care, learning and teaching, the importance of community, health and well-being, the curriculum, aspirations, leadership and lifelong learning, are central to plans that we are developing to achieve high standards and aspirations for all. We'll bring them together in a whole system approach that embraces early childhood education and care, primary and secondary education, and all forms of post-16 education, training and lifelong learning. All underpinned by an approach to education which reflects and draws on its community and is aligned to policy developments taking place in other key areas such as health and the economy. This is, if you like, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in action. And by doing this, we will ensure that we never give up on our learners, whatever their background, through supporting their journey from preschool to lifelong learning, recognising that whilst some make steady progression through these phases, others don't and need to be re-engaged, and that some may not engage until much later on that journey. That's why I talk about a nation of second chances where it's never too late to learn. And I'm also convinced that the plan needs to be co-constructed, co-owned, and jointly delivered by all partners in the education system. We need what the Canadian educationalist Michael Fullan has called a guiding coalition that brings together all the energies, talents, and leadership abilities within our system in common purpose and resolve. This is our national mission, and we'll work with the sector to develop that guiding coalition over the coming months. We can't succeed in this endeavour, however, simply through having a sustained, unified and collaboratively led approach. We also need the right policies which are evidence-informed, implemented with rigour and with respect for the agency that we want our education professionals to exercise. In my statement in the Senedd back in March, I began to set out what some of these policies will be, and I now want to use the rest of this speech to focus on others and to make some announcements on how we plan to take them forward. Using the Pupil Development Grant in an effective way will be key to supporting this work, and we've already started to work with our partners in local authorities and the consortia to align the use of the PDG to the 8 policy areas that I just referred to a moment ago. And ensuring that children have the best start to their educational development is critically important, and we need a holistic, single system for early childhood education and care. The early years are a key point for the cognitive, social, physical, communication, emotional and behavioural development of all children. And we know that significant disparities exist in these areas for children from lower income households. We are extending the childcare offer, investing more in Flying Start and extending its reach, increasing spending on speech, language and communication development through the Talk With Me delivery plan, and providing increased support for parenting programmes. In total, £805 million will be invested in these programmes between 22-23 and 24-25. Building on this and working with Plaid Cymru, from September of this year, we'll start to roll out our universal primary free school meal offer. The biggest influences on the success of learners are the quality of the learning and teaching that they experience, and particularly for our younger learners, the experience that the environment that they experience at home and at a community level. I've previously set out some of the actions we're taking to support our schools to become community focused, and I'm committed to continuing to invest in community schools, co-locating key services and securing stronger engagement with parents and carers outside traditional school hours. We are also committed to exploring reform of the school day and year so that school time can be best used to support all our learners, but particularly those living in poverty, including access to enriched learning opportunities, which better off learners take as a normal part of growing up. It's also essential that we continuously improve the quality of learning and teaching that learners from low-income households experience, as we know this has a profound influence on their progress. I know that schools in some of our most disadvantaged communities sometimes struggle to recruit and retain the teachers they want, and I want to look at how we can incentivize teachers, including those who are recently qualified, to teach in the schools which serve our most disadvantaged learners. So I'm commissioning some initial research on this with a view to then launching a pilot scheme to test some approaches. It's crucially important that we offer educational professionals, teachers, lecturers, a range of support staff, a range of professional learning opportunities to support their work in tackling the impact of poverty on attainment. And I want to tell you now a little bit more about the steps we are taking to achieve this. So over the next 5 years, we'll provide over £0.5 million to enable our school improvement services to offer a no-cost, digitally based professional learning programme to education providers focused on how to raise the attainment and support the well-being of learners from low-income backgrounds. This will be launched in January of next year, and will offer professionals the very best evidence-based knowledge. Much of that knowledge will draw on well-respected, high-quality research evidence from the Education Endowment Foundation. And I'm also pleased to announce that we are establishing a strategic partnership with EEF. As part of this, we will ask them to adapt their teaching and learning toolkit, which provides professionals with accessible evidence on effective learning and teaching strategies, to our distinct context in Wales, and to make it available in both Welsh and English. We'll also ask them to share with our schools the expertise which they've developed on how best to implement the toolkit and to monitor its impact. We plan to work with EEF to develop case studies from Welsh schools where the strategies of the toolkit have been used to good effect. And I hope that you would agree that this partnership with such a highly regarded and experienced organisation in this field is an exciting new development. Alongside this, as part of the rich professional learning opportunities that we're offering our teachers, we've developed with our higher education institutions a National Masters in Education programme. And I have now asked universities to work with us to develop a discrete pathway within the Masters, which is focused specifically on equity in education, and which will include a module focused specifically on tackling the impact of poverty on attainment. That will also be available from 2023. We know from international evidence that we need to improve the speech, language and communication skills of our learners, including their reading skills. For Aneurin and Bevan, the world of books and reading played an essential part in his journey. And we know that being an avid and a skilled reader is so important in developing the literacy that is a fundamental basis for progression in education. The Reading and Oracy Plan, which I announced last autumn, sets out the priorities in this area. And I've recently announced an additional £5 million in funding for reading programmes across Wales, which will provide a book for every learner alongside a targeted scheme of reading support focused on early years and disadvantaged learners. And as part of working towards a whole school approach to reading and oracy, we are also expanding a project which will support over 2,000 children to improve their language, communication and reading skills. The project, which is led by Bangor University, provides 7 to 11-year-olds with an intensive and interactive 10-week language and literacy programme in Welsh and English, either in or out of the classroom. It was originally launched to support learners with remote learning, and the programme now will be expanded to help improve the literacy skills of learners in Wales. And this will include rolling the project out to more schools and providing extra lessons for children and parents to learn together at home. Finally, in relation to learning and teaching, the international evidence also indicates that many of the countries that have the most equitable education systems are those that adopt mixed attainment learner grouping for as long as possible, usually until the age of 14 or 15 when they begin to study for national qualifications. This commitment to mixed attainment teaching can raise overall learner attainment and avoid the detrimental effects of setting, which often results in learners from low-income households being placed in the lowest groupings, and unsurprisingly, researchers have found that this suppresses the aspirations and attainment of those learners. We know that setting and other forms of attainment-based learner grouping is used widely in our system in Wales, but we lack robust research evidence on this and on its effects. So I will commission leading experts in this area to undertake an initial review of the evidence in relation to Wales. The review will focus particularly on the extent to which mixed attainment teaching and learning is already taking place, what the advantages are and what the challenges are, and what professional learning would be required for educational professionals. If we're to move in that direction, we'll need to listen carefully to the views and experiences of our children and young people, and this is something that we want to develop in Wales more generally, in line with our commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and together with partners, including the Children's Commissioner for Wales. And I've asked my officials to develop guidance for education providers on how they can develop the best strategies to listen to, act on, and feedback to learners from low-income backgrounds in particular. Of course, all of these considerations need to be at the forefront of the momentous reform we are undertaking in implementing the new curriculum for Wales. It's designed and intended to achieve high standards and aspirations for all, and that absolutely includes those whose attainment is impacted by poverty. Schools can design their own curricula with the needs of their own learners, the parents, the carers, and communities very much in mind. To achieve this and really gain the benefit of our reforms, we've encouraged schools to work together in their local clusters, including, of course, between primary and secondary schools. Before the end of this month, I will be publishing a direction which will require schools to work with schools outside their local cluster to ensure that we build and share effective practice across Wales. And my next step will be to set out our national monitoring programme to understand learner progress at all stages in a way that supports high quality teaching and learning and does not encourage practitioners to teach to the test. I want to turn now to the role that post-16 education and lifelong learning will play in our whole system approach. We have a proud tradition of adult and community learning in Wales, and there is a lot that our further education sector, work-based learning providers, local authorities and universities already do in broadening access to all learners, including those who haven't yet reached their full potential at the age of 16. In response to the disruption caused by the pandemic for learners moving from pre to post-16 education, we've introduced a post-16 transitions plan, which has been supported by £45 million of additional funding from 2020-21 through to 22-23, and has encouraged really good collaboration between providers. But there is more that the post-16 sector can do to tackle the impact of poverty on attainment. In my oral statement in March, I made clear our intention to expand the work of the SERA network so that it reaches more socio-economically disadvantaged learners. In the bill that's currently before the Senedd, we're placing a legislative duty on the Commission for Tertiary Education and Research to expand equality of opportunity and improve access, retention and success for all post-16 learners, including from underrepresented groups. And I've asked my officials to build on initial work on tracking learners who are eligible for free school meals at the age of 16 so we can monitor their progression through post-16 education. This will include sharing data on free school meals eligibility with UCAS so that universities, including our own in Wales, can better track the progress of learners who are or who previously have been eligible for free school meals and, crucially, can take that into account in their offers. My hope was to enable this to be available for clearing this year and then for ongoing recruitment processes thereafter. And I can confirm today that these arrangements will now be in place for clearing in August. This will be an important tool in widening access to higher education. We need to listen to and understand the experiences of these learners, and we and HEFCU have been working with a wide range of stakeholders and have recently published a draft set of principles for post-16 learner involvement and student partnership. One of the areas of concern that learners often highlight are their health and well-being needs. The further education sector has worked together to respond to these needs, and we've provided funding to support that really effective collaboration. And I can now announce that we are allocating a further £4 million in this financial year to support well-being in the further education sector. You'll see in our programme for government our commitment to offer pre- and post-16 learners a wide range of qualifications and qualification pathways of equal quality, value and esteem. This will include expanding the range of made in Wales vocational qualifications that meet the needs of our economy. And working with Plaid Cymru, I recently announced a review of vocational qualifications which will report back in the summer of 2023. Vocational qualifications should be available to all learners to meet their learning interest, needs and aspirations. And I'm confident that such qualifications will enable us to engage a wider group of learners, including those from low-income backgrounds. We also need to ensure that the qualifications pathways have at their core the skills of literacy, numeracy and digital competence. We'll also consider how we can provide more intensive independent career advice to learners from low-income backgrounds as part of the offer that we should make to all learners in relation to these wider qualifications pathways. We'll provide a wider range of high quality and high status options for post-16 learners, including access to the world of work. To this end, I want to ensure that we offer them the best possible advice and support for the choices they make, and the work which I've asked Heaven David to lead for us will make an important contribution to delivering this. I'm committed to Wales being a second chance nation that provides lifelong learning opportunities and strong adult and community learning provision. We'll expand lifelong learning opportunities, allowing learners who previously have not achieved their potential to get new skills and new competences, for example, using personal learning accounts. And I believe that family learning should be an important part of this provision and should build on the range of parenting programmes that we are funding and the importance placed on strengthening the home learning environment for school-age learners. Our community-focused schools work will help to facilitate this, and we also know that excellent models exist in further education, such as the Families Learning Together programme developed by Cardiff and Vale College. To inform our work in this area, I'll be asking the Learning and Work Institute to build on some of the initial work they've been doing on family learning and to consider the context that exists post-pandemic. It's now essential that we integrate all of these policy developments into a whole system approach, supported by an implementation strategy that will enable us to achieve sustained momentum to the end goal of creating the excellent and equitable education and lifelong learning system that is our ambition for Wales. As Michael Fullan argues, moral purpose accompanied by powerful pedagogy is unstoppable. We'll progress this work relentlessly. We've therefore agreed with Estin that they will increase their monitoring of the work of schools, school improvement services and post-16 providers in this area so we can have independent evaluation of the progress that we are making. And I want to ensure that educational leaders who've already achieved success in this area are able to help support leaders who are on the journey to achieve high standards and aspirations for all, but who face challenges. So I'll be identifying a small group of those leaders who we'll invite to work with us as attainment champions and who can help us share insight and best practice. This will include a pilot to provide peer-to-peer support that can be offered to senior school leaders working in some of the most challenging socioeconomic conditions. It was in Irene Bevan's view that if freedom is to be saved and enlarged, poverty must be ended. And in these turbulent times, that message is as relevant now as ever. I believe, and I'm sure that you do too, that by overcoming the insidious impact that poverty has on attainment, the education system can fully play its part on the journey to the fairer Wales that we all want to see, achieving high standards and aspirations for all. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions and to working with you in the years ahead to achieve these ambitions. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. It was a great deal of food for thought there. I think while we've got questions hopefully starting to come in, I just wanted to say how welcome it is to have poverty and its impact on all aspects of people's life welcomed and given a policy priority. I think it's also really welcome to hear that you're looking at a whole system approach. So it's not just a single solution, it's actually the whole system from learner well-being to curriculum to qualifications to careers advice, all that they're being seen in the round. And I think that's really welcome. What we're going to do now is move into the Q&A while Jeremy catches his breath. Because we're anticipating quite a lot of questions coming in, it'll be easier to manage them if we divide them into different groups. So I'd first of all like to invite questions on early years and childcare. Then I'd like to invite questions on the whole range of things that the Minister covered in his references to schools, so curriculum, qualifications, support for teachers, incentives maybe. Now's your chance to ask. Then we'll go on to look at post-16, so any questions around that. And finally, I'd like to wrap up with some questions around well-being. That may, of course, not cover everything that you want to ask, so do please chip in anything completely left field and we'll try and fit that in as well. So let's just turn to questions about early years. I think it's really welcome that the Welsh Government is planning to roll out the childcare offer, but at the moment it actually favours children of parents who are in work, whereas some of our most disadvantaged pupils or early years children are the ones in non-working families. I mean, what are your plans up to begin rolling out early years and address the inequalities in that age group?
Well, I mean, with regard to the childcare offer specifically, we are extending that so that it will encompass parents or carers, not only those who are in work, but also those who are in education and training. So that will extend the reach of the childcare offer itself. But in addition to that, as I mentioned in passing, really in the early part of my speech, we are also extending the reach of Flying Start, which we know makes such a big impact in the life of young people and their families more broadly. So our goal is that should be available to every child at the age of 2. And so that would be across the board. We're already starting the phase 1 of that expansion from September. So over the summer, parents who will be eligible will be notified and they'll be able to participate if they want to do that. And then I think it's in the autumn term, my colleague Julie Morgan, whose policy area Flying Start is, plans to announce the phase 2 expansion. So it's a sort of progressive expansion, if you like. But I think, in the longer term, I mentioned the idea of that holistic education, early childhood education and care approach, and doing that in a holistic way so that whichever setting or school you're in between 0 and 5, you will have the common principles, I think is a really important part of offering that common experience.
Okay, that's great. I mean, it was a bit of an unfair question because it's not completely your policy area. I mean, can we move on to questions about schools and the whole range of issues there? Do please get the questions coming in. We would be pleased to take them in Welsh as well as English. Can I ask you a question about the perhaps slightly sensitive issue of incentives for teachers?
Yeah.
And you said quite rightly you were going to look at perhaps piloting some of those. What can you say a bit more about the options that you might be exploring?
Well, I want to approach this in 2 stages, if you like. First is to commission a piece of initial research about what the options might look like. And that will then, with the aim of doing a pilot after that to test out some of the approaches, which I hope that research will tell us are likely to be effective. But I'm conscious, this is a very, very important policy area, and I want to make sure that the steps that we take are sustainable in the long term. And I think that is, for that to be effective, it needs a strong foundation in evidence. And so that's why I'm taking that 2-stage approach, if you like. I think we all know that we need to make sure that we have the strongest teaching in the schools which can most benefit from it. So I'm anxious to look creatively at this. So I look forward to seeing what that research tells us.
Absolutely. Watch this space. We've got a question just come in now on community-focused schools. And the questioner quite rightly says that it's not just about education, it's about harnessing the support of health and social services, amongst others, I might add. I mean, what are your plans to engage with health and social services bodies around this?
So we are discussing that already within government. I think there are different models for different community-focused schools. And, there are examples in Wales who are already on that journey, if you like. And we have some capital plans which already show plans to co-locate, if you like, education and some health services in parts of Wales. So that's already part of the thinking and already part of the very advanced planning. But even for schools that don't involve the actual physical co-location of services, part of the community-focused schools approach is about how the school relates to other services. So I was at school this week, in fact, talking to them about how they have used, in that case, their pupil development grant to fund a lot of their time spent supporting families in their, in their engagements with the health service or with social services or in multidisciplinary context or with the immigration service, whatever is the need of that family, really, in a very sort of wrapped around approach. And that's had two really clear benefits, it seems to me. One is it's obviously beneficial to the home environment of the child, and therefore the child comes to school just more ready and able to learn. But it's also creating a foundation of trust between the school and the family and the broader school community. So I was hearing of parents helping each other in a way which wasn't mediated by the school itself. And that, I think, is the foundation of a robust and resilient community-focused school. And working with other public services is crucial, but there's a wider range of responsibilities in that, I think.
Okay, I think that's very exciting. There's a question come in now about teachers, perhaps inevitably, and the questioner says, will there be increased mental health support for teachers as well as the proposed additional training? Now, you emphasised wellbeing quite strongly, so are you looking at supporting teachers?
Yes, I've trebled for the next 3 years the funding available to support teacher mental health and wellbeing. I think it's really important. It's important to make sure that our learners get the best teaching, but it's important in its own terms for the well-being of our teaching and teaching support workforce. So that's the kind of budgetary input, if you like. But I'm also expanding the service which already exists through an organisation called Education Support, which provides, in one-to-one support, but also school-wide support. I think schools who've had that experience, or teachers who've had that experience, report that it's effective, but the truth is it hasn't been sufficiently widely available. So that funding, I hope, will make that more widely available. Yes. And part of our whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing, which I work with jointly with Lynn Neagle, we jointly chair a task force of all the relevant agencies, is very much focused on providing resources and training to teachers, but also making sure that they get the support that they need.
Okay, I think that's very welcome. Watch this space.
Yeah.
There's a challenging one coming now. We've heard a lot about high aspirations and a whole system approach with little to show for it. So what's different this time?
Well, I've just listed, I think, probably about 20 things that I think will make a difference. So, there's a focus on supporting teachers to deliver, whether that's leadership support from those who've demonstrated an ability to to close the attainment gap in truth, but also that much richer professional learning offer. I talked back in March about making sure that our initial teacher education had a greater focus, and I talked today about the master's programme. So at each stage in a teacher's journey, there is support available to enable them to move forward, but also those interventions for the learners directly, the reading support, the voice of the pupil in the school. All of those are, I think, innovative and exciting.
I mean, it's a personal view, but I mean, a lot of the list of 20 or so initiatives that you mentioned individually are quite small incremental changes, but I think the difference is that they add up to a bigger whole. Have we got any, just checking if there's any more questions on schools. And I think then we'll go on to post-16. And you talked in your speech about a review of vocational qualifications, and I think referred to parity of esteem. Yeah. That's another thing that's been long wished for and not yet achieved. So can you say a bit more about the proposed review? Are we going to have T levels, for example?
Well, the discussion with the UK government about T levels has been rather difficult, is the truth of it, because of the approach which they've taken to rolling it out. But the broader point about the parity of esteem, I think very much of the post-16 legislative reforms that we're introducing and in the Senedd for stage 3 next week, very much as the parity of esteem legislation, really, because I think that provides that holistic system-wide funding and oversight, which can really break down those distinctions on a system level. The real challenge is making that work in a school level and supporting schools and FE colleges to work better, more closely together. We've seen really good examples of that at qualification transition points during COVID. Really effective joint working. How can we spread that more broadly in the future? And the piece of work that Heaven David is leading on for us, I think, will really tell us a lot of very useful things about that. On the review specifically, I think we need to look afresh. We face a situation where, because of decisions taken elsewhere, qualifications which are very much relied upon in Wales are being withdrawn over a period. So we need to make sure we've got arrangements in place so that when those aren't any longer available, there's a full suite of qualifications that work for our learners in Wales available. So that's what the review's there for, and we'll know by the summer of next year what it's going to tell us.
Okay, great. So quite a tight timetable for that.
Really important to do it.
Good, excellent. There's a slightly off the agenda question come in, but one that I think is extremely important, which is that are there any plans to raise the earnings thresholds so that all children in poverty are able to access support towards the cost of going to school?
Well, currently that's obviously linked to free school meals eligibility. Although there are many programmes where there's a level of discretion at a school level so that it isn't quite the sort of cliff edge which otherwise that might be. One of the implications of rolling out universal free school meals in primary schools is that we need to look again at that criteria, because you won't need, in the same way at least, to be registering for free school meals eligibility. So we're doing that very much at the moment, looking afresh at the eligibility criteria. I think there are many examples where we've tried to make sure that schools provide as much focus as possible on the cost of the school day, whether you're a child who's free school meals eligible or not. The work that Children in Wales have been doing for us, the price of pupil poverty, all schools in Wales, I think, are now refocusing their efforts on that, given the pressures that families are under.
I very much hope they are. I mean, we're still hearing stories about parents being asked for quite substantial contributions to the cost of school trips, for example. So I think, getting that understanding that not everyone's in that position. Interesting question come in on post-16 education, asking, will your plans target disabled people who've slipped through the net while they were at school? And the questioner points out that most will be on benefits and some of them are in the poorest parts of Wales. So do they have the same rights to good attainment as everyone else?
Absolutely right. They absolutely do. So in a post-16 space, one of the principal strategic duties on the new commission is to drive a system which has equality of opportunity. And I mean that across all parts of the post-16 system and all levels of attainment. So, that every learner coming in post-16 has an equal opportunity of, making the most of all of it, if you like. And that absolutely includes disabled learners. So I think that will create a step change, again, because there's a strategic duty on the face of the bill requiring that effectively.
And there's perhaps a message there about explicitly making sure that you listen to the voices of disabled learners as well in that engagement. Yeah. Challenging question in on work-based learning, pointing out that the unit price funding hasn't increased since 2007, which the questioner says is a 48% reduction. It's causing problems with retention and recruitment. Could you include a review of work-based learning in your review?
Well, I already have an external stakeholder group which is looking at adult learning very, across the board. And part of that is making sure that learning, both in the workplace and beyond, is obviously, appropriate and, effective, but is also accessible. And I think the questioner's point is about that ultimately. And so, the work that group is doing, I think, will inform what we can do in that space. Really, we want to make sure that that affordability and funding isn't the barrier.
Okay, and I think so far the assumption has been that all the investment in learning is from Welsh Government. But there's a question just come in now that quite reasonably says, what should be done to incentivise employers to invest in the training and development of their own workforces?
I think that is, it's a really important question. I think what we have seen, is that because of political developments over the last few years, the patterns that many employers, not all employers, have been able to rely on in terms of the availability of their workforce have changed. And so there's a real imperative, I think, on making sure that employers are supporting and investing in the skills of their workers, so they have the workers they need for their and I think that is beginning to happen, but there's more that we can do in that space. I mean,
there's
sure.
such an upheaval in the labour market. It's not quite clear what's going on at the moment,
No.
except it's tighter than I think I've ever known. And so, I mean, now is the time to start investing.
Absolutely.
So long as you don't have the churn.
And to work with local FE colleges to make sure that they know what the needs are for the local economy as well.
As expected, a question has now come in on mixed ability teaching. It's a bold move, says the questioner, and it might worry a number of teachers, particularly in secondary. How are you going to persuade them that it's even worth asking about mixed ability teaching?
Well, there are examples from overseas which tell us that can make a difference. And so that's why the question, on its own terms is worth asking. But, that is absolutely, I clearly understand that it's an area that people will be anxious about, and as with other reforms in education, they will look to the minister and say, what is your evidence base for proceeding? And so that's why I think it's very important to commission that evidence review. It'll tell us the extent to which it's already happening, it'll tell us what's effective about it, it'll tell us what's problematic about it. And so let's get that review in, let's see what it says, and then we'll see where we are.
Okay, I think that's perhaps that change potentially coming not long after the new curriculum is going to be really challenging, and it may well be you see some demands on the wellbeing service. I wanted to pick up a question now on wellbeing, and it's something you didn't mention in your speech, if you don't mind me saying, and that is that in the pandemic, and despite restrictions easing, we're still seeing very high levels of absence from schools, and we're also seeing, certainly pre-pandemic, in some schools, quite high levels of exclusion. And we know that it's more likely to be children from low-income families who are either absent or excluded.
Yeah.
Now, if they're not in school, they can't even begin to benefit from all the things that you're talking about. So what role do you, how are you going to tackle absence and exclusions?
Well, I commissioned a piece of work at the end of last year, which is now reported, and which I've recently just made public, and is going to be I hope, informing the work which the Senedd Committee is doing on attendance in the coming weeks. What that has told us, as you say, is that children who are eligible for free school meals have been more likely to be not in attendance than others. The pattern actually overall is, in fact, improving. What the review told us was two things. One, on a kind of system-wide policy level, there isn't much change that it was recommending, but there's a case for making sure that best practice and evidence is spread more effectively between schools. But regardless of that, I'm doing an internal piece of work to relook at all our policies in this area to make sure that they're in the right place. In particular, around the idea of persistent absence, which I think needs a fresh look. But I'm very mindful of the fact there isn't always by any means, but there can be a link between long-term non-attendance and then behaviour on return, and then that can lead to exclusion. So, I understand that link. And we're also looking at our exclusion guidance at this point in time as well, because again, children eligible to free school meals, but also those with additional learning needs. Some examples of Black, Asian and minority ethnic children being more likely to be excluded. So we are taking a fresh look at that across the board to make sure the guidance to schools is what it needs to be.
Great. As we might expect, a question's come in on expanding the school day. What are your thoughts? There's a concern that it might add stresses to school-based staff and schools themselves.
What we've run is a 10-week set of trials of different approaches. The discussions I've had with schools who've run those trials, I've spoken to several of them, show they've been popular, and there's been a mix of ways of delivering them. So what we're doing at the moment is evaluating what we've seen. Some of it will have been effective, some of it will not have been. That's the point of trialling them. We should be very open about that, it seems to me. But we want to know what staff have thought of them, we want to know what learners have thought of them, obviously, and we want to know what parents and providers have thought of them. So that's the work we're doing at the moment. But we want to do this as a way, there are clear benefits to learners of doing this. So we want to make sure we bring the system with us, including all parts of it, in order to make sure this can work effectively. So we're evaluating what we've been told, and I'll be saying something about next steps, I hope, reasonably soon.
Okay, that's very helpful. I have one last question before we close, and that is that there's welcome additional funding for supporting the well-being of young people, but understandably the questioner wants to know what it would look like for young people, and will young people themselves have a say in its design and delivery?
So the funding for well-being has been significant over the last 2 years as a consequence of COVID. As you obviously know, that funding is no longer available from the UK government under the arrangements that we have. However, I've found money in my own budget to make sure that can, not at the same level, I'm afraid, but there is funding available over the next 3 years. And actually, the way it's worked most effectively has been when it's been, designed very much with learner's voice and learner direct interests in mind, and it's very flexible. So some schools have used that for coaching, individual coaching. Some have used it for a range of other interventions. We've focused the funding on early years, you were asking me about, on those particularly vulnerable learners that need particular support, and on post-16, moving from school to FE in particular, which has obviously been really challenging. So, and that's been very much tailored actually to what the individual learner needs, and I think that's the strength of the system.
Okay. I'm afraid we are almost out of time. I would like to thank the Minister very much indeed for his comprehensive speech and also his commitment to equity and social justice. Hugely, hugely welcome. And also a collaborative approach, which I know there are concerns amongst people in the audience, but I think hearing from you that you want to engage with people rather than engage in a standoff is very welcome indeed. Can I thank the delegates for coming on a very warm afternoon and staying with us. It's much appreciated, and we will have the recording on our website fairly soon. For interest, the new Future Wales webinars, the next one is on the 30th of June at 4 p.m, and we'll be looking at health, and the one after that is on the 7th of July at 4 p.m. with jobs and business, and we have a Conservative spokesman and a Plaid Cymru opposition spokesman there for those. So my last plea is for you to keep in touch with the Bevan Foundation, make sure you're up to date with what we do by signing up to our free e-newsletter, and if you can, support us as an individual or as an organisation, because we can't do the things like this without our supporters. But thank you for being with us this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye.